Right. So good morning and good afternoon, everyone. My name is John Grace from the marketing team at ADARA, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to our first webinar of our COVID-19 Insight webinar series, Navigating Uncharted Territories. Without further ado, I would like to pass it on to Carolyn Corda. Carolyn.
Thank you, John. Good morning, good afternoon, and welcome to everyone. And thank you for joining us. We hope that each of you are safe and healthy, along with those that are close to you. I'm Carolyn Corda, Chief Marketing Officer for ADARA. We have Lee Pillsbury joining us later in the session. You can't read an article about COVID-19 and travel without stumbling across the word unprecedented. And indeed, what we're all experiencing is extraordinary. At ADARA, we saw the opportunity to help the industry by sharing our data. To that end, we're organizing billions of data points into charts and trends that help shed light on what's going on. Next slide. Here's what we have in store for you. I'll start with a quick tour of the information available on our COVID-19 Resource Center. We'll take a look at the charts and then dive into some of the latest findings from our search and booking data. I'll then turn it over to Lee Pillsbury, who will be interviewed by David Morrow to provide his perspective on industry impact, the outlook, and advice for the recovery. Next slide. If you're not familiar with our data, you might wonder where it all comes from. We're a data co-op with over 270 partners that contribute data. You'll see here on this chart, it represents some of the largest brands around the world: United Airlines, Marriott, American Airlines, Choice, TAP, Singapore Airlines, Etihad, Kayak, and beyond travel, we've got entertainment brands such as Ticketmaster and OpenTable. On the next slide, you'll see that we're also global. About half of our activity is North America, and the rest is distributed around the world. We see 1 billion profiles annually, with 30+ data points assigned to each. We also see 14 billion searches and close to 1 billion air and hotel bookings each year. On the next slide, you'll see where to find our COVID-19 Response Center. It's on our website where you can click through for our travel trend tracker. You'll see we're updating the charts each day. We're in a very dynamic situation, and so we've put the emphasis on freshness. Today, we'll share some of our initial impressions on what's going on and outline the implications. Of course, we'll continue to refine our perspective and as the trends solidify. Our purpose is that you take away from this session some insight on your markets, on your segments, along with some ideas on how you can respond. Most of the charts I'll be sharing with you today are available also on our website. To make it easier to track the trends, you'll see we've formatted the charts in a consistent fashion. So I'll give you a quick primer in terms of how to read the charts starting on the next slide. The live chart, we're tracking booking volume by trip purpose. Trip purpose is broken down by business in pink, leisure in purple, and leisure non-family, that's couples, and solo travelers there in blue. We've indexed it there on the left-hand side to 100 starting on January 2nd as a way of being able to give you more visibility into each of the trends. You'll see that we've got a, if you hover over the lines, you'll get the very latest so that you can see how it's being updated daily. On the next slide, it's the next level of drill down that we have, and that's booking windows. And again, we've indexed it relative to January 2nd. But here what we've done, so you can see the proportions of the different booking amounts. In the previous one with the trip purpose, we were just focused on everything being referenced to January 2nd and showing those trend lines. Here we're also giving you some visibility to the proportions between the different booking windows. So for example, the yellow line here is 91 or more days of a booking window, and that's 5 times the volume of the closer in travel, those trips being booked 0 to 15 days out. That's the pink line. So if you compare that pink line and the yellow line, you'll see the difference and understand the proportions as we look at booking windows. There on the right, you see how we've broken down the booking window 0 to 15, all the way to 91+ days. On the next slide, you'll see these brought together. so that as we go through these, you'll be seeing all the data, the bookings, searches, et cetera, broken down by purpose, business and leisure, and then again by booking window. It's our way of being able to give you the best visibility. What we're trying to do is isolate the spikes, where we're seeing trend lines, teasing out those segments in terms of the trip purpose, in terms of the booking windows, so that you can be more successful adapting to these trends. You need to understand the characteristics of demand, and it's our goal to provide you that with this level of detail. So let's move on and take a look at the, we'll break it down into 3 regions. We'll start with the US. There on the next slide. Here we go. So generally, when we look at trends in booking and volume, they're being influenced by 3 factors during this period. First, it's the spread of COVID-19, the government reactions, whether it's lockdowns or bans, and then finally, the third is responses from the travel suppliers themselves, whether that be cutting capacity, putting planes aside, closing down the hotels, or the actions and offers that are positive factors, positive for the travelers in an attempt to entice travelers to make their plans. In these charts, we're isolating that third factor. Change, in this case, changes the airlines made to make it easier for travelers to change their plans. On this chart, we're looking at booking volume broken out by trip purpose. We're focusing on the spike that occurred just a couple of weeks ago between March 4th and March 11th. And you'll see that's when the airlines began to change their policies relative to change fees. And it resulted in a big bump in bookings. It's instructive to look at what type of trips were booked during those 8 days, as it provides lessons to what type of travelers are responsive. You can see the biggest jump in bookings came from families traveling for leisure, that's the purple line, followed by leisure travel by couples and solo travelers. There's a little bit of, not much bump relative to business travel. So this is clearly discretionary travel stimulated by an offer, the ability to change tickets, as a signal that there is demand that can be tapped into. Now let's take a look on the next slide and understand what the booking window and how that was affected. So here we isolated the trip purpose leisure family, and it's really obvious that they're booking 91 days out and a little bit 31 to 60 days. And so, those trips being planned for May and June were the ones that were really evident when the airlines loosened up their booking restrictions. And so taking it one step further, so now we know how far out they're traveling. And you see a little bit of that in the spike for the solos and the couples, but it's really prevalent when you compare the family to the solos and the couples in terms of that longer term horizon. So we'll go ahead and click through and we'll take a look at what destinations really popped for those 2 groups. Oh, and just 1 second on that last spike. We did see a spike, kind of a double-edged one for the solos and the couples. You can clearly see the advanced bookers were planning a long time out, 91 plus days. You see a pink line, and it's the let's go home there towards the beginning of March, and that's 0 to 15 days is that pink line. And so it's people that, as travel bans begin to take place, were eager to get settled and back where they belong. Now let's take a look at the destinations that made up those trips. And so as we compare the families there on the left and the different booking windows to the couples and singles traveling there on the right, we see a few things that stand out. Not surprisingly for the families planning in May and June, that travel time, Orlando was top of the list, 79, 140% increase over the previous periods. Miami was also one that popped for both the short-term and the long-term window. And then you see some of the other ones having predominance in terms of Phoenix, Honolulu, Denver, et cetera. If we look at the solo travelers and the couples, Miami and Chicago popped for both the short and the long-term windows, as did Las Vegas. And so by showing you this, it's a way of thinking about, so which destinations are people still interested in? What are they still willing to book? And in what timeframes are they looking at traveling? Let's move on now. We'll take a look at Europe. We'll be sharing this on our website as well, but I think it's a great way of taking a look at what's happening around the world. We'll be focusing on Europe, but you can see that the red constitutes bans of all foreign visitors, so a number of countries are blocked out. Yellow is banning travelers from regions of confirmed cases, and there's a lot of yellow in Europe, which we'll be talking about, and then there's some with other restrictions. On the next slide, what we're going to focus on for EMEA is, if you'll go ahead and click through, we'll see that there is this one last peak in Europe. There it is, between February 10th and February 17th, where before some of the impact from the virus, there's an interesting burst of activity. Some of the critical dates: on February 14th, France announced the first COVID-19 death. And by the 23rd, the virus had surged in Italy, and the country was beginning to lock down towns. So we compared those last peaks between the 10th and the 17th to later timeframes there in March to identify which countries had an increase and a decrease in bookings. And I think if we'll click through, I think we'll take a look at that later period where we focused. There we go. So we looked at the period from 2 to 16th March as the comparison. So those were the two comparison dates. And by comparing those two, we can see which type of travel really fell out and what is still resilient. And I think for travel marketers, that provides some good guidance as to thinking about which markets still have activity and which you can expect to have some pent-up demand. So there on the next slide, we can see some of which of the destinations were the biggest gainers and losers. So, test yourself. I was a little surprised to see Denmark, Sweden as some of the biggest gainers between those two periods. That last boost there in February compared to what's traveling now. And so there's more traveling to those areas: Denmark, Sweden, Russia, Norway, and Germany than there had been back in February during that boost. Some of the biggest losers, not surprisingly, Italy and Spain, given how the virus has impacted them. Added to the list is Poland and Austria. So we're continuing to track country by country what the impact is, where we're beginning to see rebounds, and which areas represent what we believe will be pent-up demand. Let's go ahead and take a look at APAC. So on this slide, we're talking about travel to China, which includes both travel within China and inbound travel from international destinations. Early on, as the outbreak expanded, there was a precipitous drop in search activity. It's down by about a third between January and February. If you go ahead and click through, you'll see those differences. And today we're seeing early signs of an uptick. As we compare activity throughout February to mid-March, the index for the number of searches has jumped from a low of 23 to just over 60. That's a steep increase. The bookings have trended a bit lower than the searches throughout February. The index has been bouncing around the teens and the 20s, but they're trending up in March, with the index essentially doubling to just below 40, to 38. And so you can see, the searches are trending a little bit above the bookings, but we see these as the earliest glimmers of hope for what a rebound looks like. And you can see that both of these were indexed to January 2nd. Had the search to booking ratio stayed exactly the same, those curves would have been more similar. In fact, we're seeing the search to booking ratio increase. Something else to keep in mind as you think about how you're marketing to these different areas. From the search activity, it's clear that it's business travel. We did a deeper dive that's underpinning this driving demand. The index for business travel has doubled. And we've seen that the shortest booking window, 0 to 15 days, is up as well. And this nascent rebound aligns with the decrease in infection rates that we're seeing in that region, as well as the lifting of internal restrictions. So if you remember, the things that we're looking at are, what's the progression of the disease? Is it increasing or decreasing? what sort of activity is the government taking and what are suppliers doing relative to pricing, to capacity, as well as offers. Now, we're expecting to see an uptick in leisure travel soon. And you'll see that Bloomberg had a report a while ago, and I grabbed this quote. It was from Andy Lee. He's a tech executive. I think of him as our China man on the street. And it was really in response to thinking about luxury goods and its spending pattern. But I think this is likely to be indicative of his travel sentiment as well. And he says here, our residential compound was chained up. We're not allowed to go anywhere. Now I feel somewhat free again. And so while this initial chart is showing us what's happening, and it's more about business travel, we do expect that over time, it won't be long until we see similar activity within the leisure markets as well. On the next slide, that was travel into China and domestic travel within China. We took a look at China outbound, and here it hasn't seen the same rebound yet. So there's a real difference between inbound and domestic travel versus outbound travel. The effect of the spread of the virus and government measures to limit travel into other countries is evident here. The searches are essentially flatlined from February on, while bookings are continuing to trend down. That's it for the briefing on trends. I hope you found that helpful. And I'd like to go ahead and give a shout out to ADARA's brilliant analytic team. It's their hard work in making this data available. It's available on a daily basis that's fueling all these charts.